Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Radio Centre Ireland's first webinar of 2023. We had an in-person event last week. We had our Audio Academy, which went very well last week with a great turnout from the people who are probably in the first 3 years of their agency career. And that was an in-person event last week that went pretty well. And this is the first webinar of the year. It's a more intimate webinar than normal. That is just me. I don't have any guest presenters today, but the purpose of today is, as the slide says behind me, the stateside view on audio. I thought it'd be interesting just to look at the American market because it is by far the biggest advertising market in the world. It's also by far the biggest radio market in the world. And also it's where tech or innovation in tech tends to start. All the big tech companies tend to be based in the States. And most trends eventually come from the States to other parts of the world. Now, the presentation is not specifically saying this is the trend that's going to happen in Ireland. We are specifically just looking at the States and what's happening there. But over time, a lot of the trends in the States will come to Ireland. In terms of Q&A, if you want to ask a question, just put something in on the chat, and I will answer that question then. So I'm just going to share my presentation, so just bear with me for 1 sec. As I said, it's a view on the stateside in audio, and I've kind of 4 key trends to talk about. And the first trend is, just bear with me, is that audio is on the rise. It's probably not unexpected. And when I say audio is on the rise, it's on the rise because, you know, audio is seen as innovative. It's seen as kind of exciting and sexy. It's seen as something that is a lot of change, a lot of new things happening. And it's very much seen on the rise in the US. And so much so, I mean, there's a few stats on this, that now the average US home has 22 connected devices within it. And because there's so much connected devices, I mean, it's the opportunity to consume audio increases. And year on year, there's 20 more minutes time spent consuming some sort of audio than the previous year. And 7 out of 10 Americans are saying they listen to more audio because they can access it whenever they want, whatever they're doing, at any time. And also it's kind of, you know, antidote to visual stimulation, which is so much visual stimulation. It can be quite overbearing and tiring. And over half of Americans are saying audio helps them escape from too much visual stimulation. So audio is very much on the rise. It's also been seen as very much an aspirational consumption, an aspirational product. You have the emergence of 3D audio, that immersive listening. The likes of Sony and Apple are increasingly investing in those type of products. You have spatial audio, to the company working with Mercedes to provide dynamic head tracking sound in cars to give that kind of theater or cinema-like experience in car, where the sound moves with you as you go through what you're listening to. And there's also 360 immersive listening devices that Sony are working with other car companies as well. So there's very much seen as audio is seen as aspirational, seen as quite innovative, and seen in some ways as premium. And so much so, actually, there's what's called the sonic luxification. So you have this product is actually a speaker coming from Louis Vuitton, believe it or not. Now, I don't think too many people are maybe going to purchase this. I think it costs around $2,000. But it just shows you that even a brand like Louis Vuitton, which are not in the audio space, are seeing audio, high-end audio, something that they want to get involved in. So they produce this speaker because they see that audio and innovation with audio is quite aspirational, it's quite interesting, and they want to play a part in that. And I think there'll be other brands that will do that in the future too. And there's also things happening in the States. There's a company called Spatial, who are building immersive workplaces where people can have soundscapes which allow them to relax, meditate, focus on the work, and be kind of therapeutic. And there's increasing development, particularly in the States, around companies like Spatial, who are providing those kind of environments to the working place of the working environment. So really kind of interesting developments in audio in terms of how audio is positioned and how audio is seen. That's also very much seen as a wellness product. We talk about audio healing. There's a product called Dipsy, which is an app that helps people sleep to therapeutic music. You have a company called Sona, who last year at CES launched one of their missions was actually through proprietary music that they produce to actually license audio as a medicine. And there's increasing, innovation in the area of wellness, in the area of audio being therapeutic, helping people to relax, helping people to de-stress. So, a lot of these technologies and innovations are happening in the States, but I think they will progress and they will migrate into other areas of the world too. So audio very much seen as a lot of people consuming more audio in America than they did before, a lot of innovation around, a lot of exciting things in new areas such as luxury and wellness. So it's really, really interesting. And as I said, audio is very much on the rise. But there is a kind of a bull versus bear approach because audio is rising, but how does it all fit together? And one thing to have has happened because audio is rising and there is more opportunities to listen to audio in different ways. The pie is getting more busy and everybody has to take a share. So the chart in front of you looks at Americans' share of time spent consuming audio and by what device. So you can see by far the biggest share is still radio receiver, AM or FM, with 38% share. But quite interesting to see how YouTube now is becoming a big player within audio and how people are discovering and looking and consuming content for music. YouTube is becoming really important with a 14% share, streaming audio at 17%, old music at 10%, and then the smaller shares, as you can see in front of the chart. Interesting podcast, only 6%, even though it takes up a lot of kind of airspace about the innovation within podcasting. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. So you could see the bull versus bear approach because, AM, FM is only a 38% share of total audio listening. What is happening is the pie is growing bigger all the time because there's more opportunities to listen, as we said in a couple of charts earlier, anytime, anywhere, because technology allows that to happen. So FM radio is still doing very well, but the share of total audio is going up and FM is having a decent share within that total audio space. And as you can see what's happening with device share, the reason people are consuming audio more and can do so anywhere at any time is how they consume audio is changing by device. We look at that chart going back over the last 8 or 9 years, going back 2014, 49% of listening was through an FM and AM receiver, and only 18% through a mobile device. And now in 2022, they're bang on there. They're neck and neck with both. 33% of time spent listening is through an AM, FM receiver, and 33% of time listening is through a mobile device. And as you can see, one graph is going up and one graph is going down, and that obviously trend will continue. And within that, the younger Americans, so 13 to 34-year-old Americans have significantly shifted to mobile to listen to their audio. Going back to 2014, it was even Steven between a radio receiver and a mobile. Now for younger Americans, 48% of their time consuming audio is through a mobile device and 19% through a radio receiver. And that hasn't happened in Ireland to that extent yet. The audio market report that Ipsos produced last October still sees receiver as dominating in Ireland, but over time, that's likely to change. But having said that, while they're doing so, audio consumers are increasingly buying the way out of ads on streaming service. So increasingly, they want to buy the premium service, which has no ads. And you can see, if you look for 13 to 34 in particular, go back to 2015%, 35% of their consumption was ad-free audio, and now that's up to 45%. So it is increasing. They are using their mobile more, they are using devices more, but they're also buying into ad-free services more than they did in the past. So I look at the bear versus the bull. What's happening is opportunities to listen to audio is huge. It's really innovative. It's really exciting. People are consuming it more and more and more. The overall share of audio is going up. But then where does ad-supported audio fit within that? Well, the interesting thing is AM, FM radio in America is still delivering huge reach because the overall pie is going up and FM and AM still has a very big share of that overall pie. So, the amount of people in America being quite huge, 65% are still listening through broadcast radio every single day. So you get 65% reach. every single day through broadcast radio. And radio's reach has not declined. It's actually increased over the past few years. So what you're seeing is live radio share of our bigger pie is still strong, and you're still getting that daily reach in America, even though despite all the changes and all the innovations and all the opportunities to listen to audio through different technologies and different devices, radio, live broadcast radio is still huge, a big, huge reach medium in America at a time where the likes of TV is declining in the States, where audiences are going down. A lot of advertisers are seeing radio as a really big medium for driving reach to connect with their consumers. And then when you look at just ad-supported audio, I think it's really important. I think it's really important in Ireland too, when people talk about all the different opportunities to listen to audio, you have to actually break it down. What audio are people listening to that allows advertisements, commercials to be served? And when you look at the pie in that regard, 78% of all consumption to ad-supported audio is through live radio, through an FM receiver. 13% is through on-demand music, and 9% is through podcasts. So what you're looking at is audio increasing, bigger share, and FM or radio receiver having a decent share of that. And then within that, where there's a huge innovation around audio, if advertisers want to reach people through audio, one way they have to reach them is through live radio, and that still delivers a huge amount of reach. So you can see the bear and the bull. You can see the bear saying, "Oh my God, there's so many choices," and radio share is going down as a percentage of total, which is true because people are listening in so many ways. But the bullish approach is audio is increasing hugely, and you still deliver huge reach through the FM receiver, and on top of that, using obviously digital audio and podcasts to drive incremental reach. And that's certainly what you can see from an in-car position too. So people think, again, what are people doing in-car? FM radio in the States certainly rules ad-supported audio in car. So anybody's listening to audio with ads around it in car, it's very much driven by FM or by live radio. I think advertisers are really seeing this, are noticing this. So in the States, you can see, and this is both broadcast radio and digital audio, that revenue has grown significantly over the past few years because they do see the role for audio driving incremental reach and doing other things which is really beneficial to them. At the same time, there's a lot of decline in TV audience numbers too. So advertisers are very much voting with their feet or voting with their checkbook and increasing investment in audio. And no better example than the biggest advertiser in the world, Procter & Gamble, who have significantly increased their audio spend, both broadcast radio and digital audio in the States over the past number of years. It actually hasn't transferred into Europe. P&G in Europe aren't doing that, but they very much are doing so in the States. And they've talked about 3 reasons to do that. Is incremental reach at scale, that they need audio because the likes of TV is declining in audience. They need audio to really drive incremental reach. Contextual relevance is really important for Procter & Gamble because audio allows you to do that, I think, much more than any other medium. What I mean by contextual relevance is having ads placed in a situation where people are doing similar things. So, for example, somebody is cooking and they're listening to an audio piece, and the ad talks about cooking, and that has as research has shown, has a really big impact on the effectiveness of an ad. If you're cooking and you're hearing an ad that relates to cooking, that really drives purchase and drives saliency. And I think radio and audio can do that much more than any other medium because the nature of the medium and the nature of the product. And then finally, influencer and talent and using personalities, connecting with brands to drive awareness, to drive consideration for the brand. So P&G see a very clear role for audio across those 3 areas. And I think it's going to continue to grow. And I think audio listening will continue to grow. And I think there's 2 ways it'll continue to grow. And I take this model from, if people are familiar with Byron Sharp, and we talk about brands, talk about how brands grow. They grow through 2 areas. One, physical availability, go in store or e-commerce to buy the product. And mental availability, where people are thinking about brands, that you think about that brand first or second. I think that can also apply to audio as well. So if you look at physical availability first in the States, you can see how things have increased in terms of the access to audio, because going back to 2014, I think the Amazon Echo had just launched, so nobody had a smart speaker. Now 60% of American households have a smart speaker. Smartphone penetration back in 2014 was 54%, so it's now 73%. So increased penetration of connected devices makes it much easier to access audio anytime, anywhere, and no matter what you are doing. So I think that increases the physical availability of audio. And secondly, there's increased availability because people are working differently than they used to do. People are now working at home for a significant proportion of their working week. And that also means there's more opportunities for people to listen to the medium. So only 46% of working adults saying they're working full-time in the workplace. So the physical availability of audio is increasing because devices allow it, and how people are working or living their lives allow that too. And secondly, the mental availability of audio is increasing as well. And I'm probably cheating slightly because this is not from the States, this is actually from the UK, but I think the principle applies to all markets. They did some recent work on need states. I think that audio satisfies 7 contemporary need states. That's the mental availability. If I'm in a certain need state, what's going to help me with that need state? And audio has 7 need states which satisfy consumers, and that means lots of things they're doing create saliency for audio to be important as part of their lives. And it's broken down into 4 areas. One is personal, keep me in the loop about things, help me escape. One is context. So while I'm doing other things, can audio help me lift my mood, keep me company while I'm doing another task? Social is about providing social currency or amplifying a social moment. And content is broaden my horizons, learning new things. So they're the need states. And as you can see how audio performs, it tends to be driven by the more, if I go back one side, the more context. So keep me company, lift my mood. So when I'm doing something, audio is there to keep me company and lift my mood by doing something that accentuates the activity I am already doing. And you can see the other need states there. And then live radio tends to dominate most of those need states, except for broaden my horizons. And what that kind of means is, the reason the increase in mental availability, I think live radio and then on-demand and podcasts, rather than competing for share here, are actually quite complementary because they service this different need state. So live radio is about driven the need to feel energized, uplifted, and more connected with social groups to the wider world, while podcast is led by a desire to learn new things and develops understanding of topics, while on-demand music services is centered around mood management. So you can see a physical availability of audio in the States has increased because of devices and because of the way people work. And then the need states was done in the UK, but I think it applies to other markets. There's increasing need states and audio can satisfy them, which means I think things are looking well for audio in the States going forward, and indeed applying to other markets too. So that's a kind of trend number 1. Trend number 2, there's still challenges with perception though, and I think this, you'll see where it is in the States, and I think this applies to all markets too in terms of audio. So there's very much still challenges. So there's still a misperception in the States. AM, FM radio has low reach. So a lot of advertisers think that is the case. And that's a study done, and the question was asked of advertising agencies, what's the reach of AM, FM radio? And 44% was the perception, and the reality was 86%. Pandora, Spotify, obviously Pandora, a big streaming service in the US, and Spotify you'll know well. So they're nearly equal to AM and FM in terms of reach for ad-supported streaming. Again, advertisers were asked the question, what's the actual share of FM versus Pandora and Spotify in terms of ad-supported audio? And that's the perception, and the reality is so completely different. So these common trends are in the States, are very much in other markets like Ireland and the UK. Another misconception, number 1 thing people do in their car is stream and listen to podcasts. And I showed this chart already. Actually, within the car, it is very much the FM receiver that is ruling the roost in terms of ad-supported audio in the car. So if you listen to ads, you tend to be listening to live broadcast radio. Today's up to a media plan, put all your money into TV and digital. This is something, and we are working on this, and it will not be something that will happen quickly, is trying to do cross-media coverage. There is ways and means of doing that, and they've done it in the US through modeling and data fusion. And they have a tool that allows advertisers to measure cross-media measurement. I know some agencies in Ireland have their own proprietary tools, but this is an industry tool driven or supplied by Nielsen in the US. And it's very straightforward. This is a very powerful chart. that shows a campaign that has 68% TV budget, 13% connected TV, 20% digital, delivering 57% reach in the US. Do the same budget down to broadcast radio, you reduce the other media a little bit, and the reach increases to 8%. It's extraordinary. That's why Procter & Gamble are increasing investment in audio in the States, because they need incremental reach, and audio is the medium that will drive that. Looking at doing modeling around those things in Ireland is that we don't have that yet, and it's something as a future plan to try and deliver an industry-wide tool that allows incremental reach and being able to look at multimedia reach across different channels. So that's a very powerful, but yet the perception is not there in the States. And the final one, there's a total lack of ROI and sales lift of AM, FM radio. And in the States, that's not true, because there is a powerful information on ROI across all categories. For a dollar spent, you can see the returns there are very significant. And again, that is something we are working with in Ireland. We've appointed a Canadian agency to work with all the agencies in Ireland, and we're hoping to pool all econometric data together to produce industry aggregate data. Probably not as detailed as this, because we won't get into as many categories because of the nature of the number of studies in Ireland. But again, trying to look at that in Ireland. But the perception in the States is there isn't this information, but it's very much there. So again, the second trend, a lot of issues with perception of audio in the States that are similar in the UK and similar in Ireland. The third big trend is radio broadcasters have become dominant in digital audio. So it's very much, digital audio has been driven by the radio, but the traditional radio broadcasters, and that's happened through investment and acquisition. The likes of iHeart buying into programmatic companies such as Jelly, you have Sirius XM, the satellite radio station, initially buying, the podcast content and distribution company like Stitcher, and buying the streaming service Pandora, and more of that as well. So digital audio in the States very much been driven by what would have been traditional radio broadcasters. And just to focus in a little bit on one, because they're all doing similar things, just focus on iHeart for a moment. I mean, their kind of mission is to give everyone a friend that is there anytime, anywhere. So they have a voice platform strategy, which is to increase footprint to meet customers wherever they are, no matter where they are, they're there to meet them. The second one is to build innovative utility-driven experience when they're consuming an iHeart content, and then explore new distribution channels. And I'll touch on that in a moment too. So firstly, as increased footprint, they are available on over 250 different platforms across voice assistants, automotive, over the air, smart TV. It's quite complicated. If you think automated, you have to have a different kind of structure and system per company, but they paid a huge investment in ensuring that they are as widely available to consumers at any time of the day, whenever they want. And as part of that, they're building innovative utility into the experiences. So again, in the States, you can have this user-generated playlist where listeners create their own playlist, but it's filtered in and it's built in with the radio listening experience. And the radio can provide more similar songs for free to the listener, or you can discover songs from radio then that listeners add to their playlist. And then there's also data-generated user-specific playlists based on listening activity. And also do artist stations where listeners can create their own artist station, but it's then weaved together with live radio. So it has the experience of live radio, but just has particular content that's driven by a particular artist. And you have curated playlists that can be done based on era, decade, genre, or indeed whatever you're doing at the time. If you're jogging, if you're cooking, if you're relaxing, to create curated playlists that's linked back to the radio experience. Quite interesting then, another kind of a modernization of the call-in, where you have a talkback technology which feeds directly into the content management system. So a listener can record something up to 30 seconds, send it in, and within 10 seconds, that is then integrated into the content management system and can allow then very smooth interaction between presenter and listener. And a lot of this new utility is then being monetized through video pre-rolls in streaming, audio with companions and banner ads. So a lot of innovation to monetize the new utilities that they're working on. There is a big area in the States of exploring further channels. The connected TV is becoming increasingly important for audio. So again, a lot of the big radio groups in the States are looking at voice integration, since it's smart TVs or connected TVs, visual companionship in that experience, and then also to increase podcast content distribution within the connected TV. And if you look at that as a TV is now a big source of audio consumption. If you actually look at 13 to 34s in the States, 10% of the audio consumption is through a TV experience, be it a traditional TV or a connected TV. So that's increasingly becoming important as a distribution channel for the big operators in the States. And then finally, in terms of innovation, in terms of new distribution channels, the metaverse is becoming increasingly important. The Gen Z audience tend to discover new music through gaming. This has become increasingly important for radio broadcasters in the States. And it's a place that artists can actually interact with fans. It tends to be co-funded and very much experimentation on the likes of Fortnite and Roblox. And there's an example there of iHeartRadio having a presence in, that's either Fortnite or Roblox there. And that's becoming increasingly important, very much early stage, very much experimentation. But it's really interesting area where they're looking at that young generation where gaming is so important to them, and it's where they discover a lot of music. And then there's a huge investment in technology in the States that really powers cross-platform audio advertising. Without going into the detail there, you can see across programmatic, broadcast, content creation, analytics, measurement, brand safety. You need all these businesses and platforms and talent to come together to try ultimately and make the experience of buying audio similar to the experience of buying digital in terms of the experience, in terms of the real-time analytics, and interesting, a lot of work on combining broadcast with digital audio to give a kind of full view of the buy across both broadcast and digital audio. Here's an example where, again, looking at building up first-party data, first-party listeners, and combining that by tagging your first-party exposure, tagging your digital media with third-party measurement to try and bring first-party data and third-party data together, as trying to bring broadcast measurement and digital measurement together in one single platform. And I think, so there's lots of work happening in this area, and I think the key thing is trying to deliver real-time analytics dashboards. The counter advertisers' view is they're investing in less effective media simply because they have a perceived perception that the level of measurability and accountability with those media is higher than audio, and it isn't. So there's increasing work going on providing real-time dashboards and combining broadcast and digital audio together to give a full view, cross-platform view of the buy on audio. So that's another big development in the States. And then the last trend, I was looking at time, the last trend is podcast audiences expanding. And when I say podcast audiences expanding, I don't just mean listenership is expanding. There's increased interest from broadcasters about podcasts, and there's increased interest among advertisers too. So in the States, there's 160 million people listen to a podcast every month, and the latest monthly podcast listener growth is at 11%. So it is growing, even though if you look back at the chart I showed earlier, podcast does take up a lot of kind of share of mind. It's still only 6% of share of audio consumption. So it's still relatively small, but is growing, and there's huge interest in this area. And what's happening is radio broadcasters are increasing investment in podcast content. So it's having the increasingly have a podcast attached to shows. So for example, a morning breakfast show, but maybe not everybody can consume the breakfast shows. They're busy getting kids to school, doing whatever they have to do. So now what's increasingly happening is a podcast version of that show later that day, not the full version, a smaller, shorter, summarized version of that show. So you're seeing a big increase in podcast radio becoming more prevalent. Another thing that's happening is radio broadcasters are co-creating with podcast creators and agreeing a revenue share. So rather than radio stations just doing their own podcasts, they're looking at podcast creators all over the place and working with them, combining to co-create and agreeing a revenue share, or sometimes letting the podcasters do all the work and just marketing and distributing that podcast on their behalf. Because the one thing radio broadcasters have is they can provide a platform and the audience and the marketing, because there is millions and millions of podcasts, and the big issue with podcasts is how to discover them. It's not like it is with Google search. It's much more tricky to discover a podcast. So there's millions of podcasts out there that aren't being discovered. What's increasingly happening is radio broadcasters are partnering with podcast creators and saying, come on board with us. We will market you. We have a ready-made audience. We will market it, use our platform, and we'll deliver an audience to you. And then there's a revenue share happening there, some sort of revenue share deal, which works for the podcaster and works for the broadcaster. In the States, it's very high demand for podcasts because the ad count is very low. There isn't that many ads. So the CPMs are actually really high. They're much higher than broadcast radio. And what's really increasing hugely in the States and hasn't happened in other markets as much is that live host read are increasingly popular because advertisers see the results they deliver because of a host is reading something in a very natural way that's integrated into the show. It is very powerful. It's a very powerful endorsement once it's done properly and once it's done naturally. And that is a format that is really, really popular in the States and increasingly so. The majority of spend on podcasts has been with direct-to-consumer brands driving web traffic. But that trend is changing as more well-known kind of general consumer brands are beginning to increase their investment in podcasts. And just to give an example, there's just asked of Edison Research asked of consumers, what format do you like? And host mentions comes out very strong, and sponsorship messages with pre-recorded ads a little bit down compared to the host rates. And probably similar to other markets, these are the kind of key advertising formats. As I said, there's pre-roll, mid-roll, and post-roll. Host reads that lends that authenticity to your brand. That's really, really popular. There's this extended mid-roll, which is the middle of a podcast, which is a longer format, maybe 2 minutes long, and it's a mini custom ad. Then that may be inserted and can be used for deeper storytelling. There's themed episodes, kind of sponsored episodes. And interesting, there's a lot of now custom podcasts being made for brands, a bit like advertiser-funded programs on TV, on broadcast. So this is increasingly becoming important where brands are coming together, working with podcast creators to create content that is really done really well, but has some sort of subtle brand story within it. And dynamic ads and 3D audio are innovations within the podcast space. There's still three key challenges when it comes to podcast advertising. I think three really big challenges: discovery, measurement, and brand safety. As I said, discovery is really tough because there's so many podcasts, and how do you discover it? There's millions of podcasts. But one interesting thing in the States is YouTube is becoming increasingly important, not alone as a content provider for podcasts, but also as the method of discovery to discovering podcasts, and particularly with newcomers into podcasting. So if you look at the chart on the right, heavy podcasters are still using Apple as the kind of preferred choice in terms of their platform for podcast consumption. But if you look to the left, the podcasters, newcomers started this thing past year. It's very much YouTube is the platform that are using for podcast consumption. That is very much happening in the States. It hasn't happened as much in anywhere else. I think that trend will happen over time, and therefore YouTube becomes a really important channel for discovery for podcasts over time. Second area is measurement. Obviously, Apple and YouTube are driving a lot of podcast consumption, are a closed kind of book in terms of data. And current technology does look at every download, but people do not know if that download, it's not a confirmed listening because you can download and not actually listen. And the only identifiers at the moment are IP addresses, so at household level. There's a plan in the US for Nielsen One for audio to provide multi-platform research, but it's very complicated and there's no clear timeline, and that's kind of been delayed. But another thing they're looking at in the US is quite interesting, going back to old kind of survey-based research, which is kind of the research that's done primarily, is the method primarily in Ireland for measuring radio consumption. And there's a trend towards that because of the complicated nature of how you measure podcasting. So asking people, and because it's a very personal consumption, it's very easy for people to remember what podcasts they have listened to because they've had to download and specifically decide to listen to it. So there's a trend going towards survey-based research of podcasting to understand who and what type of person is consuming it. And finally, brand safety has been a big issue with podcasts. Brands really worried about the content and where the brand's going to be placed. And AI is really changing that, as companies like Barometer and Sounder now provide AI technology that transcribes every single piece of content on a podcast and then breaks that into different types of content to provide brand safety or brand suitability. And this technology works with DSPs, so the API filters straight into DSP, and you can filter inventory to block unsuitable content. So I think brand safety has been a big barrier, particularly for broader brands outside direct to consumer, like the likes of Procter & Gamble or Coca-Cola. But this technology is allowing brand safety as an issue to be reduced, and meaning those types of brands are increasingly looking at podcasts as an opportunity to connect with the consumers. We're just on time then. It's basically to summarize. Americans are increasingly spending time consuming audio. Audio is innovative, it is sexy, it is interesting. There's opportunity to consume it is increasing with devices, as we talk about physical availability and with mental availability. So it's a really brilliant time for audio as a medium. It's really exciting and innovative. The US audio landscape is changing. As you can see, much more change towards consuming via a mobile device. But what is very clear that broadcast radio is hugely dominates its ad-supported audio and delivers really significant reach, which means that audio ad spend, both broadcast and digital, is increasing in the US. The strength of audio isn't necessarily top of mind with US advertisers. The issues that you have in other countries are in the US too, when I showed those perception versus reality charts earlier. American radio broadcasters have really become dominant in digital audio through acquisition and investment, and they're really working very hard at giving a similar experience to a digital visual buy as you get with an audio buy in terms of real-time analytics and cross-platform measuring broadcast and digital audio together. Broadcasts have invested in linking, as I said, broadcast radio and digital audio and delivering real-time analytics dashboards. And finally, podcasts are increasing in terms of listenership, in terms of interest among advertisers, and radio broadcasters are investing significantly in this area. And YouTube is increasingly becoming important as a platform for discovery and content in the US. And I think that will travel into other markets too. So many thanks for your time. I know we just have about 5 minutes left, so I'm not sure if there is. I'll just go into I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, and I'll just go into any questions. Outside of radio having discoverability, any other growing areas of the way discoverability is increasing. There is quite a bit of technology happening in the US around discovery. So there is a lot of work around creating banner activity that has a lot of podcast information within the banner. So I'm working with demand-side platforms to deliver an audience that using technology to serve a banner to a relevant audience, and means within the banner people can click and view and listen to the podcast straight there within the banner, integrated into the banner. So I think there is changes happening in that area. I think there's more going to happen in that area too. Any early trends on listening for AI, Apple's recent voice AI for audio books. Yes, I do think that is there is going to be a trend continue in terms of AI, in terms of smart speakers in general. I think that's going to be a really important distribution channel for all radio broadcasters and digital audio platforms in the US and in other markets. And I think there will be increasing amount of work done around AI, around text-to-speech, around even opportunities around AI, I think, in terms of commercials, where I think increasingly what you'll see is opportunities for people, rather than having to, particularly for smaller advertisers, rather than having to voice and revoice different commercials, using AI to drive and to create relevant copy for smaller advertisers, where they don't have to go through the production kind of cost barriers of creating different pieces of creative. I think there's going to be lots of opportunity in that area too. There's also work in terms of synthetic voicing in the US, whereby even working with broadcasters and presenters and how they can use their voice in different ways and different means, rather than that person having to be always in studio. So yeah, a lot of changes happening in that area too. A few more questions here. Yes, so we will be circulating the slides. Yes, I will be circulating the slides, and actually there's a recording of the webinar, so I will be able to share that with the attendees. So I will do that. Is there any evidence that US has a similar emotional connection to the medium of radio like we do in Ireland? That is a very good question, and I don't know the answer to that specifically. I think certainly in Ireland, I think the connection is stronger. I think in Ireland, speech content is, dominates the airwaves more so than in the US. So I do think in Ireland we're probably nearly a unique emotional connection with the medium, and probably less so in the States. But I haven't seen any specific evidence of that. I think the one key thing that's happening is consumers, Americans, are seeing audio as being really cool, really interesting, and very much a utility because they can access it so easy at any time and anywhere. And I think that's become really, really important to them. And things become important to advertisers as well, because they're seeing the value of getting that incremental reach. And they're also seeing the value, I think, of this contextual messaging, whereby, and again, it wasn't actually US research, it was UK research, but it showed that if you place an ad around an activity that people are doing, it has a really significant effect on what they're doing. I think radio will allow that from a commercial point of view to have that emotional connection. If you're doing a piece of activity and you create a commercial content that's relevant to that, it's quite powerful. You can only really do that in audio. You can't really do that in another media. But I don't specifically have any evidence about the emotional connection with radio content compared to Ireland. But I'd say Ireland's probably stronger in that regard. But, listening, the big groups, the iHearts, the Cumulus, the Sirius XM have very strong listenership, and increasingly are, getting first party data. So people are logging in and providing some information to these to these broadcasters to allow them to provide increasingly content that's relevant to them. The one area that isn't kind of progressing at all in the States, and that isn't some other markets, is subscription based. So there's no real move towards, asking people, a bit like what we talked about earlier, this ad supported versus non-ad supported. There's no real developments in the States in terms of asking people to subscribe to a radio broadcast or to get a premium service that is ad-free. I think what's happened, I suppose, in terms of looking at the streaming services such as YouTube, etc., and looking how they declined in numbers over time. I think the radio groups of broadcasters are staying away from subscription-based support. What they're doing is looking at, asking people to log in, getting first-party data, and then using that information to provide content and experiences that are very much relevant to that person. Is there any more questions? We have 1 minute to go. I'm just thinking, is there any more questions? I think that is it from a questions point of view. I will have the slides, and there will be a recording of the webinar as well. So really appreciate all your time, and also eating into lunch here. So many thanks everybody for attending today, and I'll see you all again soon. Many thanks and goodbye.